Welcome to the Rebel Matriarch Podcast. My name is Samantha Sanford and I am your host, and I want to invite you into this session with an open heart and an open mind, because this is not just a podcast. It is a global movement, a global uprising, and this is a representation of what is truly possible and available to women today. Hello, gorgeous human beings, and welcome to the Rebel Matriarch Podcast. My name is Samantha Sanford, and I am your host. And I am bringing a beautiful, I would say Turkish delight, but she's not Turkish. But she's delightful, and she brings such a beautiful expression of soul to the conversation. And so I'm really ready to dig deep into your story, Carissa. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Yes, me too. I've known you for a few years now, but I don't know you. But then in the last couple of months, we've kind of come into spaces together, and I've gotten to know you a little bit deeper. And the more I get to know you, the more I'm like, I have feelings for this woman. I have so much like love, respect, admiration for what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you're showing up as a woman, as a leader, as an entrepreneur. And so having this conversation with you means a lot to me. So thank you for being here with me.
Thanks, babe.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. So for those of us who don't know you and those who have never met you before, you currently are the founder of something called SoulSync. So for those of us who don't know what that is, what's SoulSync?
Amazing. Great question. And so SoulSync is a multitude of things, but ultimately at its kind of most grounded level, it is an agency, a software and support agency for people to ultimately have the infrastructure and architecture to support their missions from an online space. And so we have a membership that has a subscription for like an all-in-one software that supports with the kind of architectural pieces of how we interact back and forward with our services. And then also we have the side, which is the service to build and create and offer the actual physical creation of those things. And so we have a variety of different clients that have a different scope of how much they require or desire from our services. So we have some people that just on a membership level, and then we have people who we take care of and look after the whole back end of their operations side, and in varying different degrees of what that looks like for different people in their missions. And so the beautiful thing about SoulSync is that the way that we hold the quantum architecture of what the soul's mission is to anchor into the planet. And so the way that it was birthed was that I could see the soul mission of so many individuals that didn't have the architecture and the infrastructure for that soul mission to be synchronized with the physical planes of existence. And so it's literally a synchronization of the soul mission with the physical mission, and how can we anchor that and actually offer the infrastructure to service the people that we're taking care of and looking after and offering our services and magic towards. And so, yeah, that's in a nutshell what it is.
I love that. And I love this. And, you know, there are a few words that you've used that I'm like, this is why I value these conversations so much, because you don't talk about business, you talk about mission, which already tells me there's a lot of depth to what you're creating. And then you're talking about, you know, anchoring in the soul mission and the quantum magic of it all. And then I know for myself, because I've been in this space as well, I've been in online business for over 10 years. And for most of that, I was doing VA work or operation manager or general manager, everything around the structuring, around how you build and support a business. Mm-hmm. And there are so many entrepreneurs, so many coaches, so many just women in business who really lean into the feminine way of doing business as well, me included. And to know that there's someone like you who's actually bringing that a really healthy, balanced, masculine structure that honors the feminine aspect and the feminine flow and the connection to soul and source is actually a really needed and exciting venture that's coming through.
Yeah.
And so I love that it's coming through you and that you've got this opportunity to create a level of support that is so, so needed in the world. Do you find that you have more women coming through your support than men, or is it much for muchness?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I have more women mostly because of the industry that I service, not so much because I can't also serve the men, but typically the industry and the space in which I service is that kind of spiritual entrepreneur kind of vibe. The coaches, the healers, the mentors, the people that are offering courses and programs and things like that. And I think just generally speaking, there's a higher percentage of women in that space. And my network of connections of people are more predominantly women because of the space and the area in which I typically have my avatar. And so, yes, it is predominantly women. I do have a couple of male clients, and they are in the same space. They work with like different type of mentorships and stuff like that, but mostly women. Yeah.
I love this. And I also know that when you're supporting spiritual clientele, you really need to have a level of your own experience in that industry. So you need to have gone through your own initiations. You need to have gone through your own, healing journey experiences and whatnot. And so I'm curious to know a little bit more about how your spiritual journey started.
Well, this is where it becomes a very long story.
These are my favorite kind.
And so, I mean, my spiritual journey started very, very young. I did my first Reiki level 1 program when I was 8. And
Wow, that is young.
yes. And so I was playing with energy, and I did Reiki and energetic healings on myself. I used to use Reiki every single night to put myself to sleep when I was a young teenager slash kind of anywhere. I guess I probably started it from straight after when I did my Reiki course. It was just like a 2-day Reiki training for kids. And so I'm sure it's different to the main adult training that happens these days. But at that time, I learned how to co-create with energy and how to co-create with my own energetic field and the impacts that has on my reality. And then, I did my first weekend meditation retreat when I was 11. And so I had a really big influence from both of my parents from different angles from pretty early. And so they did, conscious parenting kind of courses together when I was probably around that sort of mark of maybe 5 to 10 years old. And so they were doing their best to be as consciously aware of their impact onto us as possible. And so I had a really kind of metaphysical influence from my mum. She was really interested in energetics and metaphysics and how our consciousness interacts with our physical reality. And so she went on a journey from when I was quite young with mentors and doing her own kind of personal work. And from my dad, I received more of the kind of more grounded, anchored aspects from the how would I call it? He has a really deep connection with the land. And so I received traveling around Australia to all different types of spiritual sites, whether they're deemed that as or not. And I gathered a really deep connection with the land myself. And so it's actually a really powerful piece that has just landed in this past week, actually, for me, around the soul lineage of my father line and what I've received from that really unconsciously up until now, funnily enough. And so, but ultimately, from a really young age, I was really interested and open to all those kinds of things. I learned about astrology and I had crystal parties and all that kind of stuff when I was a kid. And then there was like a period of time in my kind of young adult life where I was just cruising around like every regular 20-year-old. And then it really came back in full force when I stopped working and decided to go and study full time, and I wanted to study nutrition. And it just kind of brought me back to those roots of wellness and mindset and all those kinds of things. And so it really kicked back off in a really big way in about 2017-ish, 2016. And that's where I kind of really hit the ground, because I came out of that period really wanting to support people with their consciousness, with their awareness, with their own ability to be a creator of their reality as opposed to a victim of their reality. And so I started like coaching people one-on-one from like a life coaching perspective about 10 years ago. It was 2016, I think, was when I had my first clients. And then it just kind of snowballed and evolved from there. And I very quickly moved into more of a business kind of coaching role, because when I was doing my own learning about business and co-creating in containers with people, I just found myself always supporting everyone else with these aspects of their kind of the structural aspects of how they market, sell, and create infrastructure for their offerings. And so for maybe kind of 5 or 6 years following that, I really supported people individually and in groups at a personal and kind of mission, business ascension angle. And then it kind of evolved into SoulSync more recently.
I love this. I'm still blown away that you were able to experience your spiritual journey so young, and that you had parents who were so forward thinking for that time.
Yeah.
Because, I'm working with my husband to raise my girls in a really conscious way, and there's still so much resistance and pushback to it, and there's still a lot of learning to do around it, right? Because sometimes people can be they disregard the need for boundaries and discipline and things like that. But how is it that, like, I'm curious to know what your parents' upbringing was like, or why was it that they were so open-minded at the time that they were?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't really know, to be honest, because they're kind of unique in their own families. I mean, they were both brought up in fairly well-structured family dynamics. They have their own stuff like we all do, no doubt. But my dad had very progressive parents. They were, even up until when they died, like, my grandfather only died a few years ago at the age of 96. And he was very progressive. They were into women's rights and feminism. And for that generation, that was really ahead of the curve. They were not normal for their generation. And they were very much advocates for like Indigenous rights and land rights and different aspects of like the Australian culture. And they were really very kind of for the people. And so that, and in saying all of that, I probably received more of the exploration of consciousness definitely from my mum than my dad, even though my dad probably had the more progressive family in many degrees. And so, yeah, I don't really know what I think that they were both encouraged to just follow what their heart kind of told them to do, I guess. I don't really know. I think that my mum probably went through her own spiritual awakening when I was quite young. And I think that was a huge catalyst to her own curiosity of the universe. And I think that really sparked more openness from dad. I don't know that dad would have been the one going, yeah, let's go to a parenting course. But they did it together because they wanted to have as good impact on us as possible. Yeah.
I get full body tingles when you share that story, especially when you talk about your dad's parents being very forward thinking and for the people. Because when you look at today's state of affairs and the complete lack of disregard that there is around human rights, and then especially women's rights, and then even more so children's rights, and the amount of resistance and pushback that we experience today when we have these sorts of conversations, to imagine what your grandparents the kind of, I would love to be a fly on the wall and just like listening to some of the conversations that they would have had amongst themselves, but then also with other people who they would have received so much pushback from. Did
Yeah.
they ever experience, I don't think segregation is the right word, but, were they ever like isolated, or were they ever, made to feel like they had to be on the outskirts, or they were like, I don't give a fuck? Like,
I don't actually know, to be honest, because it was just so normal in my family that that's the way that we viewed things. And so I never really experienced or had insight to any kind of resistance or pushback. Yeah, so it's a hard question to answer because I never asked them, because to me it was so normal and I hadn't sort of experienced any. I mean, I've definitely experienced people thinking that I think about things in a really different way. But yeah, I never even thought to ask. And they're no longer with us, so I can't ask them anymore.
well, we can always ask them in spirit, right?
Totally. Yeah. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did in many ways. Like, I feel like as a typical thing, that generation holds just naturally programmed racism and naturally programmed colonialism and naturally programmed patriarchy. And they really were none of those things. And so, yeah, I'm sure that they experienced a lot of interesting resistance just from their society, from their community. But yeah, I kind of feel like they probably hung around people that were their vibe, yeah.
I love this. It's always helpful, isn't it?
Yes, totally.
Vibe, my gosh.
Hang around with people that get you.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So for you then, growing up, you've had some amazing influences. And then, growing up through teenager, in your 20s and then beyond, I feel like you would have had a slightly different perspective on humanity, on world crises, or however you're meant to say that word. What were some of because you mentioned that people, thought some of your thinking was a little bit off or funny or whatever it was. But I'm curious to know what some of your thoughts were along the way, and even today, like how you feel about world events, but not from a 3D human matrix perspective, but more from there are greater powers that be at play. Like there are big things at play, and I'd love to know that perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question was how I was encouraged as a young person that everything has meaning, everything has reason. And that if we get curious about that, then we can discover a lot about ourselves and about everything else. And so the first thing that came to my mind was, as a young teenager, having conversations with my friends about why I wouldn't take a Panadol if I had a headache, because there would be a reason for my headache, and why I was very aware of being in conscious reflection of what I hadn't been speaking up about if I had like a chest infection or something, sore throat or something like that. And that every aspect of my own health and symptomatically was an expression or a symptom of something that was going on at a more psychological or emotional level. And so that was really weird for a lot of people to receive that. It wasn't normal. I didn't know anybody who had that same belief except for my mom and some of her like friends and stuff like that. It wasn't a normal conversation. And so that was sort of the kind of first experience that I had of being kind of seen differently, I guess. And actually, just as I say that, another memory comes to mind of, I remember, and I was in about grade 3 or grade 4, so I must have been 8 or 9, I guess. And I was sitting in a classroom, and the teacher, I still can picture myself sitting on the floor, her having this conversation with us and telling us about how, ultimately on some level, she was trying to talk about arrogance or some level of something along those lines. And she was telling us that we basically shouldn't love ourselves. And on some level, I'm sure she meant it from a kind of arrogance perspective of like a entitlement or some kind of power over perspective. And I put my hand up and I was like, well, my mum told me that you are meant to love yourself, and I love myself. And I remember like just being
I love 8 or 9-year-old you.
I know. And I remember just being so adamant that she was wrong and that was not going to be how I was going to live, and I was very like righteous in my thing that I had to put my hand up and tell the whole class that you shouldn't be telling the whole class this because that doesn't sound right to me. And I have no idea what her response was or like what that ended up happening. But I remember just thinking, oh, this is so weird that not everybody gets this same messaging. And that it felt so true and right to me that like being on the path of like loving yourself felt like the right way, and so yeah, there's literally lots of little kind of moments like that I recall from a young age. And ultimately, as I've gotten older, I think that my general outlook and perspective and also privilege has had me absolutely not get caught up in world events in the same way that I might have if I was watching the news, for example. Like I stopped watching, general TV and the news many, 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 many years ago. And so by disconnecting from that grid, I feel like there's a level of non-contact with a lot of collective problems or collective issues at some level. And like I said, there's an aspect of that is privilege because I haven't had to interact with it, and so therefore it's not a direct issue that I feel like I'm as involved in. And there's also a choosing to disconnect from those collective grids so that I have the ability and the capacity to stay as integrated into the higher realms as I possibly can. Because what I believe is where I place my focus and attention supports with the creation of those things that I'm focusing and attending to. And so it's not a denial or a bypass of what is. It's about spending as much time and energy in the timeline that I want to create for the world, rather than how I can change it, if that makes sense. And so, because I really believe that the biggest and greatest impact that I can ever make is to be in self-evolution of all of the places where what I can see in my external reality live within me. And so if there is harm happening to people or famine or power structures that are not supportive to humanity or war, any of those things, I'm very consciously aware that there is not a lot that I as an individual can do about that. And it's absolutely not my mission to be a huge advocate for those things. And so I look at, okay, what can I do? And all that I can really do that is going to make the biggest impact is to look at all those things and go, how does that live within me? And so if I'm looking at a power structure, for example, where people are being made powerless, I look at all the places where I have power over, where I have misused my own authority, where I have not been respectful or honoring of somebody else's needs, even in the most micro of ways. I think this is a really hard thing for people to really understand because they look at these big problems and see them very directly and go, I would never do that. And then you go, okay, and how about how you were mean to Sally last week when you were grumpy, or you were not as kind to that person at the checkout that day, or you honked your horn at someone because they made a mistake, like all of these micro things. And so that's how I try and see it from a really personal level of the impact that I can make, because if I can unravel all of the places where those things live within myself, then I can be the greatest change that I can be by not further perpetuating those problems. And the ripple effect that it has on the people that are around me and my community and all of the things and all of the places is greater than me posting on social media saying stop war. Like it just doesn't tote for me. It doesn't. And I've seen a lot of conversations about how to be and how to act in those ways. And I just have to stay true to what feels true for me, which is continually being in reflection of how this lives within me. How can I unravel this and be the absolute highest expression of my own self that I can be, and how can I do as little harm in my own reality as possible and trust the ripple effects of that, considering it's not my mission. There are people whose mission it is to be an advocate and to share about different things and to be a messenger. And I honestly believe that that isn't everyone's mission. We have different angles that we come at. And so currently with world events, the perspective from the fact that consciousness is on a incredibly steep ascension process, and it is fast and it is rapid and it is brutal to the masses because of the sheer percentage of people that have not been in conscious awareness of their reality up until now. And so we have had many different things happen over the last 5 or 10 years that have created a toothpaste effect where you are squeezed through the end of the tube and it feels intense and it feels brutal, but it's absolutely necessary for the evolution of ourselves. And the way that I see world leaders, they are here to shake shit up. They are here to break things down. They are here to demolish the current structures and to have people see and actually acknowledge where this stuff is coming from and the problems that are there, and ultimately bring every single one of us closer to sovereignty. And sovereignty being that it's God, then me, then the government, not God, then the government, then me. And how can we be in our highest form of our sovereignty and no longer be a victim to the government or a victim to the realities that we are presented with, and recognize where we can actually be empowered in our power to create a more beautiful world. That was a long.
It was brilliant. That was brilliant. You were speaking and I was just like, oh, she's putting words to everything that I've thought and felt for a really long time, because it's a really difficult conversation to have, especially when there are so many people who are suffering or who are affected by it. And to say to them, like, be aware, but then also come inside and like let it be a reflection of what's inside you, and how can you show up? How can you reconnect with yourself? How can you reconnect with your divinity, your intuition, and really like heal yourself and come home to yourself and be devoted to yourself, because that is a ripple effect that's actually going to create change when there's so many people that are suffering. And so it's actually really refreshing for me, and I know for some people, to have this sort of conversation where it's like, actually, this is what I can do. Because so many of us think it's too big. What can I do? Like literally,
Yeah.
I don't have the resources. I don't have the skills. I don't have anything. Like, what can I possibly do? And then you have people yelling at you on social media saying, everyone needs to speak to this. Everyone needs to do something. And it's like, okay, but like, I don't know what you want me to do. And so I've been trying to shift the conversation to be more about what you can do is actually start with yourself and internalize it. And then you just explained that, and you gave such a beautiful, like a really clear way for women to actually reflect that back on themselves and say, where am I doing these things, or where are these events showing up in my life?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that they sort of unravel that or work through that. But I'm just curious to know if you can give some examples of what that looks like when you start spotting, war or conflict in your reality and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the first thing that just came to mind as you're sharing is that to first have a very, as clear of an idea of what is your lane as possible. Because it's really easy to get caught up in the noise of people's perception that you have to be everything to everyone. And it's just simply not actually viable for any of us to be everything to anyone. And so, if your mission is to be a mother, then the biggest and greatest impact you can make is to bring up children who are kind and loving and self-reflective. Like that is going to create more ripples into the schools that they're in, into the people that they're friends with, into the people that witness you as a family in a loving unit. It's, if your mission is to be a good mom, you have to unravel all of your own stuff, to unravel your own problems with your own parents so that you can be the highest expression in your family. And the same is true for any vocation or any area in which we are pulsed to or pulled to be interested in or fascinated by, or where we feel like our energy is being drawn to, no matter what that is, what we perceive to be our purpose or our mission, whatever that word is, our work, our really what it is that we want to spend our energy towards. And if that happens to be in advocacy and sharing and being like a speaker for a greater group of people, then that's awesome. But that isn't the case for everyone. And to be in absolute honor and respect of, again, people's autonomy and sovereignty to be in their own lane of what it is that they love to talk about. If someone is simply not interested in a particular topic, we don't need to condemn them for that. We just get to be in celebration of everyone's uniqueness, and celebration for the people that are willing to be the advocates and the ones that are the change makers from that level. But that if everyone was doing that, then think about all the other things that would go amiss because nobody would be focused on them. And so that's kind of the piece that sort of came through first. And then the question, sorry, remind me of the question again.
I don't remember.
What it looks like to unravel our own kind of ways. Yes. And so I recently listened to a podcast with Dr. Demartini and Aubrey Marcus, and Dr. Demartini used a really great example of how to break down a really big topic that we look at, and how to break down all of the different aspects that live within ourselves. And he used an example of rape. And he said he was using this example of how he supported someone to see the gifts or the beauty in one of their life's experiences. And he talked about rape. And I thought this was a really good example, because when we see someone who has raped another person, it's very easy to dehumanize. It's very easy to say that is bad, that is wrong, etc. And whilst on one level, and a very human level, that may very well be the case, when we look at it from a more metaphysical perspective, we can look at, okay, cool, what's actually happening here? and from a psychological perspective as well. And so the example that he used of rape is like, everyone would look at that and be like, I would never do that. And so therefore, when I look at that thing, there's nothing for me to self-reflect on, because I would never do that. And so what he did was break down what are the smaller components that make somebody take advantage of or have power over another person. And so he broke down some of the different aspects of what it is to have power over someone, to feel a sense of potential powerlessness that then has us have to balance that out internally by having power over someone. Where have I taken something from someone else without permission? Where have I taken advantage of somebody else's, I don't want to say weakness, but if I have more strength than that person, taken advantage of my own strengths? Where have I looked at another person and felt entitled to their perspective, to their actions, to how they give to me or how they act around me, the entitlement? And so it's like breaking this big topic that seems abhorrent, that we could absolutely never identify with, and that person is not human because they did that thing. And how can we actually break it down into micro aspects that we can perhaps see within ourselves? So when I think about entitlement, or when I think about power over, how often do we as parents make decisions for our kids for them? Now, one could say that that's what we're meant to do. And then the other could say, yes, and what level, to what degree is that true? And where is the line? And when do we cross it? And with animals, how do we treat animals? We absolutely have power over them. We keep them captive. We feed them when we want to feed them. There's so many little micro things. And when we break it down to that level, it gives a greater ability to see and rehumanize the other person and the actions that they are and have taken. And so when it comes to war, we can look at all the subcategories of what it is to be. Again, there's entitlement, there's power, there's destruction, and you can look at all that and go, okay, if I get really honest with myself, and that is one of the hardest things for most people to do, because it is far easier to say, I would never do that, than to feel the experience of potential shame or regret or guilt of having acted in particular ways at particular times. And it is far easier to condemn someone else and their actions than to be really self-responsible. And so to me, the only ticket to freedom and the only ticket to sovereignty is self-responsibility. And if we can't be in the highest and most embodied sense of self-responsibility, we will never be free, ever, because it's always somebody else's fault. Somebody else is always doing something wrong. We are always the perfect one that would never do such a thing. And ultimately, it's all an avoidance of feeling the shame and the guilt and the sorrow of the actions and the impacts that we have made in our lives. And the access point is, little by little, being willing to feel those feelings rather than walling off and protecting ourselves from feeling those feelings. And I can totally appreciate the density that can feel like, the intensity of feeling those feelings. And I can really appreciate why we numb out and avoid feeling those ways. And that isn't going to support or help anything, because ultimately everything that's happening in our reality from a war perspective, for example, is just the unconscious of humanity becoming conscious. It's so that we can see all of our unconscious on the stage. And so if we look at it from that perspective, all of a sudden we have a willingness and a curiosity to explore. And I think it's just taking a lot of the blame and shame out of it, because if we don't hold ourselves as something bad and wrong for having made those choices in the past, then it can feel a little bit easier to access those feelings that, we may feel shame, but we may be able to be compassionate towards ourselves simultaneously, which gives us more capacity to be with it. Because if we were in shame on its own, without compassion and love for those aspects of ourselves that made those decisions, then it can be an incredibly challenging frequency to sit within. And so therefore we avoid it. And ultimately that is what the greater collective is reflecting to us at this time, is all of the places where us as individuals have those shadows and we don't acknowledge them.
Just a light conversation. Just
touching on the small topics.
This just the small stuff. This is making my heart so happy, even though it's such a dense conversation, because it's so necessary and you articulate it so well. And I just really want to acknowledge you and just say thank you, because you have compassion as you're explaining it, and you give enough detail so that people can understand all aspects of it, and it really lands. And so I just, firstly, thank you.
Thanks.
A big part of my mission is recognizing that as women, especially, because that's my main focus, women and children, we're conditioned to be disconnected and dissociate from our bodies, from our experience. And we've been desensitized to all the things that we can sit here and casually talk about rape, and it can be a casual conversation, right? Because we're so desensitized from it. And we can talk about the Epstein files, and we can be enraged, but also we're really desensitized by the actual brutality of it all. But the depth of where you're going is so important, because, and I have questions, because I understand completely what you're speaking to, and I'm really excited to actually explore that for myself, where when you're looking at what's happening, and then you reflect that back to yourself and you bring it into smaller actions, and how am I showing that up? Because as we do that individually, I can see what you're saying. Like, it brings the unconscious to the conscious. And then as a collective, like, things actually start to shift in a really powerful, profound way. And then there's an aspect of me, and maybe DeMartini spoke to this, or you have a perspective on this. When you spoke to the person that committed the rape, I've always said things along the lines of, when you hear about these atrocities that occur and the people that do those atrocities, they weren't born evil. They weren't born thinking, I'm going to do these horrible things and I'm going to feel good about it. It's literally part of their upbringing, part of their environment. And so they're conditioned to become these people that do these awful things. And so my truest belief is that we have so much more power over who we get to be, who we get to become, and who we get to raise as children as well. And so it's like taking self-responsibility for ourselves and for the people that, we raise, right? So we're in alignment there. And then my question is, if we took the example of rape that DeMartini used, and we break it down and we can apply it to ourselves, and that'll make sense, how does that then, like, what then happens with the rapist who committed the atrocity, even though we can understand that there were reasons why, and we can understand that there are aspects of his actions that we ourselves committed as well. It still leaves the question open of, but he still did the act. So how do we, I just feel like that we need to close that loop, because I know that there will be other women going, but he did the wrong thing. And I don't know if you have an answer, or if DeMartini touched on that.
Yeah, I don't feel like DeMartini did a particularly good job of kind of meeting this layer. And I think that, first of all, there is so much really incredible examples of content out there that expresses and shows that hurt people. And that ultimately shame that sits in the shadows gets expressed and comes out in very leaky ways, such as this as an example. And so, does somebody need to be punished for their act, or do they need to be helped?
Rehabilitated.
Exactly. And our current society leans towards punishment without any rehabilitation. And that, or very little rehabilitation. So long as we are dehumanizing the people that make these choices and do these types of things, we will continuously and forever stay locked in the punishment kind of way of solving problems. And what we know with absolute certainty is that punishment doesn't actually solve any problems, because it further shames somebody. And the further we shame them, the further they get put into the shadows, and the further it's going to be expressed. And it's why people often who do end up in jail, for example, come out and end up going back in again, because nothing has actually changed. And so if our system was geared towards actually supporting the individuals that have made these choices, yes, there gets to be consequences for our behavior, absolutely. And what are we doing in order to support that person to no longer require to express that behavior because of all the unseen aspects and the masked, the hidden, the put away aspects of our emotions. And so again, the greatest thing that we can do as a parent, for example, I don't have kids, I can only speak to it from my perspective, is to teach them how to feel shame if that comes up, and not avoid it and not further shame it, because there's currently a problem, and the best we can do at that level is offer a solution. But what about if we prevented it in the first place? What about if every single one of us did as much internal reflection as we could, showed up for our kids with as much capacity for their emotionality as possible, to support them to have consequences for their actions, because the behavior isn't in alignment with, for example, doing no harm. And so can we express, like you said, the boundaries and the consequences while simultaneously not further shaming? There's like a complete rearrangement of how we deal with behavior than just punishment, getting put in the corner, getting put on timeout. None of these things actually effectively support an individual to be able to process and deal with the emotions of why they're doing the behavior in the first place. And so I'm not sure if that really fully answers your question, but in short, yes, there gets to be consequences, but also how are we actually supporting these people? Because it's all well and good to point fingers and say this person is bad, they did the wrong thing. But if we are unwilling to support from that angle, then we are just as much a part of the problem.
I agree. I agree. Especially, and you know, having gone through my own experience of sexual abuse, and then the perpetrator not being punished ultimately, and then witnessing all of that, but then also not being rehabilitated and all the rest of it. I do understand the benefit of having more of a rehabilitation to it, obviously with consequences. And then there still needs to be, respecting that until we know, there's a big likelihood that it'll be a reoccurring offense until it is properly rehabilitated. How do we know it's properly rehabilitated? We're not here to solve world problems, or we're having a conversation about it, right?
Exactly.
So there is that aspect. And then you touched on something which was deeper, which is something that I'm really passionate about, which is getting to the root cause of why people do the things that they do. And for me, it's a really big lean into why it's so important to really shift into a matriarchal society, because everything that I've learned is that the matriarch society is focused, it's child-centered, it's woman-centered, and man-centered. Like, it's focused on everybody's needs, having everyone's needs met, and then coming together and collaborating and doing all sorts of amazing things. And I know that you've experienced aspects of matriarchal communities and things like that. And have you got any experiences or wisdom or shares of where you've witnessed what it looks like when we come together with matriarchal principles to then support people to rise above or shift or rehabilitate or change or do better?
I wouldn't say that I have experiences in the form in which we were just speaking to.
Yep.
No. And at the same time, I'm in that experience every single day with myself, with my partner, with my family. How do I act and perceive things that go wrong, for example? And how quickly can I be in the absolute essence of forgiveness for something that isn't on the scale of rape, something that is, how much do I hold on to these things? And one of the really powerful ways that I have personally found to unravel my own ability to, I guess, hold wrongness in a different way is to recognize how it's benefiting me. As
How
in,
the wrongness is benefiting you?
yeah, like as in if I'm having a perception that somebody's treating me in a particular way that I perceive to be wrong or bad, how am I actually benefiting from that behavior? And that is one that will fry your noodle. That is one that is very, very, very challenging for someone who's not familiar with that concept to come into alignment with. It is, I would say, something that requires a hell of a lot of practice and becomes a fairly advanced way of looking at reality. And whilst at a human level, those things are perceived and experienced as abhorrent and wrong and bad. At a soul level, at least in my experience, my soul doesn't see good and bad. It sees experience, period. It sees evolution, period. It doesn't really matter to my soul whether I experience it through trauma and suffering or through like play and joy. It's all just experience. There is no hierarchy or better or worse than. It's simply experience. And this is talking about this same topic from a different level of consciousness. We're not having the human conversation when we're talking about this. We are having the multidimensional conversation, the soul conversation. And we can't have both at the same time without acknowledging that we're having two separate conversations. Because my human can think this is abhorrent and disgusting and I can't believe this happened. And my soul at the same time, the very same moment, be like, I'm okay with this. And so that does not condone the behavior. The soul's experience does not condone the human behavior. They're two separate levels of having a conversation about something like this. And so when it comes to the experiences that we've had and the wrongdoing that has happened to us, my journey has been about seeing where I've benefited from it, because it is the most empowering thing that I can do for myself to be in the embodiment of not being a victim. And at the same time, you may very well be victim to an experience, but do I hold the victim consciousness of that experience do I remain in it? Or do I choose to have as much empowerment about my experience as possible? And that comes down to choice. And it's not bypassing the experience, because we simultaneously look at the trauma and the healing that needs to happen from that experience at a physical level, at a physical consciousness level. And then we simultaneously look at what's the soul lesson, what's the greater purpose for having had this experience. Now, I also recognize the privilege in which I can speak to that from, because I haven't experienced a lot of trauma in my life. Now, is that because I'm lucky, or is that because from a very, very young age, these principles were nailed into me? And so the traumatic or is it because I don't perceive my own trauma to be that traumatic because of the way that I'm willing to perceive it? They say that trauma stores in the body based on how we perceived the experience, not the experience itself. Yes. That is why some people can have this same experience and one person is heavily traumatized and the other person isn't. It's why a lot of people have no perception of something being bad until somebody tells them it was bad, and then they have a trauma response. So there's a lot of data on this. There's a lot of psychological studies that have happened that have shown that a kid who has been the greatest trauma that can happen can be from the societal's perception of that being bad and wrong. And that then our consciousness goes, oh, I didn't realize that thing that had happened was bad and wrong. Now I do perceive it to be bad and wrong. Now I feel shame, even though before I didn't. And so how much of our narratives and stories about these things actually create the trauma versus the physical experience itself? And that, again, is coming from a level where you have to be to have that conversation. We don't disregard the physical trauma experience. It's happening in tandem. They're both happening at the same time. It's just, what way do I want to experience my life? What do I want to walk around feeling like the world's against me and that all these bad things happened to me? Or do I want and choose to explore the gift that this thing has given me and how it's supported me in an evolutionary perspective, and how it's empowered me to become more powerful, and how it's highlighted the aspects of me that were unable to be empowered before that moment? And was that act or experience just an opportunity for my soul to go, whew, okay, I'm heading down the wrong path. I'm going to go this way now. Or maybe that was the perfect path. It's not the wrong path. It's just the path that sends us in another direction. And had an experience with this really recently where I had a interaction with someone very, very close to me who I had perceived that had come into this particular interaction with a very low degree of compassion or conscious awareness of how this particular thing was going to impact me. And I held on to it. I was really like, you know what? And I expressed it to them. I shared, like, I think that you really came at this whole thing with, like, you could have done better. And, they were apologetic and all those things, but it ultimately didn't resolve it in me. It was still like I was holding the story that this particular thing had been not the highest or most ideal way for that interaction to have happened. And I could tell that I was holding on to it. And I was like, okay, what needs to shift in this? And so I had a session with someone and she helped me discover what the gift was. And once I recognized the gift, I no longer perceived that experience to be anything other than what it was. And that I didn't perceive it to be bad and wrong. If anything, I actually wrung this person and thanked them for doing it after, because what I realized was this person refused to treat me like a victim and held me in my own highest expression, my own capacity for resourcefulness, my own ability to create and be the most powerful version of me. And so why would they need to treat me any differently to that? And all of a sudden, my whole reality shifted because I was willing to look at this experience from a different angle. Now, that thing may still be perceived by 99% of people as the wrong way to go about it. But my consciousness was willing to look at it from a different perspective, which gave my whole physical body a de-traumatization. Like it unraveled what that had previously meant to me because of the stories that I was making about it. Now, if we can take that from a very micro experience and apply it to everything, what changes in our reality? All of a sudden, I become more self-responsible, more powerful, more embodied, more sovereign, and more in control of my reality and how I perceive it. I cannot see a reason that is not the way to go about it. Like, it is significantly helped me over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in my life. And I have absolutely I've never heard a bad reason, like somebody to tell me why that's not the right way to do it. Like I've never had a good enough excuse from someone or a good enough reason as to why. And people find it confronting because it's much easier to be in blame of someone else than it is to be in empowerment and self-responsibility for how I have been a contributor to my own experiences. And obviously when we talk about children, that's a whole other can of worms because, to what degree are they in the creation of their experiences? And that the only way that I can be in that exploration is from a soul level, because there is no way to justify it. There is no way to excuse it or make it okay from a human level, because it's not. And so I have to look at it from a soul level, because otherwise nothing fucking changes. Like, what changes if I continue to look at it from this one angle and see it as bad and wrong and just hope that one day the world is healed and that every single person stops doing horrendous acts? Then I'm a victim to everybody else's expression and reality, which doesn't actually support me at all.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. And so many of us are existing in that state of reality where everyone else's actions creates our realities, and we're not taking radical self-responsibility for how we perceive that. And I know that this conversation might go over the heads of many people, and so I encourage people to listen to it multiple times. And I find it really interesting, but obviously not so interesting because, of course, the conversation is happening now. Because in the last couple of months, I've actually been diving into Demartini's work, not specifically with him, through him, but with someone who I've done some work with who really speaks to this. And a lot of what she speaks to and she asks is, what was the benefit of that thing happening? And so when you were like, it really takes your mind to look at this from a different perspective. It's not just like a simple, it really is like a mind fuck. But at the same time, when you really lean into that, and I'm just going to add in an example just to help deepen what you were trying to speak to, because it's really important when we talk about what is the benefit of this traumatic thing happening. When I think back to the sexual abuse that I experienced with my stepfather, and the role or lack of responsibility that my mother took. And when I look at how did that benefit me because of that experience and however it unfolded, all the details of it, because of that, I realized that, and you hear this a lot, that women can often end up with partners who are very similar to their fathers, right? And I was like, well, my actual father was not a great example of a man that I would like to be with. And then obviously my stepfather was not. And so because of that experience, it really shook me to my core, so that I was really intentional with who I would end up being with. And so if you meet my husband, he's very, very different and very opposite in all the best possible ways, because I was so intentional because of that experience. And then because of that experience, the way that I raise my children, my daughters, I have 2 girls. And so when it comes to their security, their safety, their confidence, their self-assuredness, knowing their body parts, having boundaries, learning the difference between, if they don't want to hug someone, they don't have to hug someone. You know what I mean? Like, it's because of my experience, they get to experience a completely different reality, and they get to be a full expression of themselves, because I will, that is the only way I will allow it to be because of my experience. And so when I think about the benefits of my own traumatic experiences, I wouldn't change it, because if those things didn't happen, I would have ended up in a very different life role. I would not be having these conversations. I would not be the Rebel Matriarch. I would not be impacting women's lives. I could tell you the life that I would have. And what I think about it, and I'm like, God damn it, I don't want that life. And so it really is an opportunity for women to contemplate, whilst it doesn't make the traumatic experience right, what is the benefit of that having happened to you? Because of that experience that you had, you made different choices in your life, and that's led you to be benefited in some way. I just really wanted to anchor in on that, because it's a powerful shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And having that perspective does not condone the behavior.
That's right.
You having your own internal reality shift and your own willingness to look at the benefits and to really see how it's created and shaped you as a powerful woman does not condone their behavior. And that's what I think people get really confused about. They think that by being in acceptance of my experience and coming into forgiveness and all those things makes it what they did okay. But the two are not kind of correlated. They're 2 separate things. And I think that's a huge part of why people really struggle with this concept, is they think that by doing that, it makes it okay. And that's what I think Demartini did terribly in that podcast, was not really articulating that one doesn't equal the other, and that they are 2 separate things to a degree. And you can be in forgiveness, and you can recognize all the gifts and the magic that you have received from a really horrific experience, whilst simultaneously that person needing to, whether they do or don't is kind of none of our business, but ideally take responsibility for their actions and to have some type of consequence to their behavior. But one doesn't negate the other. And I think that is the biggest thing that people struggle with this idea, is that if I do that, then that makes it okay, when they're not on the same realms of reality.
Yeah, no, I agree. I struggled with this a lot too, but now I'm going through these processes, and the relief I'm experiencing, and the aha moments, and the shift from unconscious to conscious, and the things that are happening in my world are beautiful. And still, my stepfather will never ever meet my children, right? There's still boundaries in place. I no longer speak with my mother. We're disconnected. She will never, she's met my first daughter, but she's never met my second daughter. And those boundaries are in place for a reason. So even though I can let go of the anger, the frustration, I can recognize the benefits, and I can make huge, rapid changes in my world and create beautiful magic in my world. There's still boundaries in place. I'm just not attached to the victim consciousness of it. And I'm doing something grand, like spectacular for my girls and for every woman that comes into my reality. And so I'm really glad that you touched on that.
And every woman that doesn't come into your reality, like at a frequency perspective, and this is what, again, we don't fully understand about the internal work and the level of impact that that can have. When we understand frequencies and what shifts in all, our planet is a frequency soup. It's all mixed together. They're all kind of interacting with each other. Whether you meet someone or not, the frequency of your own empowerment ripples out into the collective, and it impacts people that you will never even meet. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, that the more that we do these little individual unravelings, that the frequency of empowerment, the frequency of love, the frequency of compassion, the frequency of self-responsibility ripples. Whether you do it intentionally or not, it impacts the collective. And that is why it's so valuable for us as individuals to do these pieces, because we don't really understand the impacts that it's having.
No, we don't. And if people want the science behind it, you can just look at the research they've done on the electromagnetic field around our hearts. And even if you look down to what is an atom, or, everything is 99% space, like everything is 99% energy. And so you can look into the science of what you're speaking to. And then even without looking into the science, I full-heartedly agree with what you're saying in terms of the frequency work. And so I love that you spoke to that as well, because a lot of people it can almost feel like they feel defeated because they're not understanding the ripple effect of a frequency. And so they're like, well, what's the point? What's the point of me focusing on myself, prioritizing myself, loving myself, healing myself, neutralizing, alchemizing? Like, what's the point? It's not going to change anything. The world's not going to stop being at war. And it's like, actually, if more people did it, the ripple effect of that frequency would create huge changes in the world. And so it's an invitation for every woman to know that everything she does for herself, she's doing for so many others, just through frequency.
Yes. And I honestly believe that one person embodying more of their light is like a million people not. And that is the effect that happens. And this because we look at individuals who are shining their light on a huge stage, right? And the millions or billions of people that get impacted by that one person being in their light. And even if, like, we might know them on a public level and you could explain, oh, well, it's happening, it's because we know who they are and we see what they're doing and whatever. But at an energetic level, it changes people. It changes the frequency of the field. And there isn't actually a way to stop that. And it's why the collective is currently showing what's underneath the surface for all of us. Even for those of us who have been consciously doing this work until now, it's still, I'm not seeing what's happening and going, oh, this is the shadow of the collective and I'm not part of that. It's like, no, I am still part of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be part of the reality that I can see. And so I get to my refinement of that might be at slightly different levels or layers, because I've looked at some of the bigger ticket items in my reality and I've kind of been with those, and maybe it's more refinement, but the work is equally as important for all of us.
Yeah, it really is. I deeply love this conversation. And I was not expecting it to go here. I never know where it's going to go. And then when it goes to these places, it just makes my heart so happy, because these are the conversations I love, and the conversations that more people need to hear, because they're not the conversations that most people have. So I know that this conversation will make a lot of people uncomfortable. And this is just an invitation to sit in the discomfort, and rather than numbing out or, tuning into Netflix or eating crappy food or I don't know, whatever your vices are, it's like, what if you actually took half an hour to just contemplate it, to sit with it, to let the discomfort in your body rise up, to notice it, and then ask yourself some questions of, why am I uncomfortable by this conversation? Like, why do I feel this way? And what would happen if maybe I asked those questions for myself?
Yeah. And always bringing the frequency of curiosity to the table. Curiosity is such a light and playful frequency. It's not about discovering what we've done wrong. It's about being curious about how, if we want a better reality, how can I do that? And if it does make you feel uncomfortable, get curious about why. What is it about this that makes me uncomfortable? And be really honest with yourself.
Yep.
Because it is far easier to project that I'm wrong about what I'm saying than it is to look at our own shortfalls, to look at our own shortcomings, the parts of us that haven't acted with the highest integrity, who haven't been the most compassionate to other people. It is deeply challenging work to look at those aspects of ourselves. But if we can bring compassion to those parts of ourselves and recognize that it lives within all of us, when none of us are excluded from that, it's part of the human condition, it's part of why our souls came here to evolve as consciousness. And can we, any time that we're pointing the finger at someone and naming and shaming and looking at them as wrong, it is just a part of ourselves that we are denying compassion and love towards. And like I said, that can be a very big concept to wrap our noodles around. And like I said, breaking it down can be helpful. But if every time we point our finger out at somebody and shame them, we are ultimately just shaming an aspect of ourselves. We may not resonate with them for the whole of ourselves, but there will be one little part in there that will speak back to our partner in our head and be like, you
Yes.
secretly. We've never said it out loud because that would be mean and rude, but those frequencies of our thoughts still impact the field, whether we say them or not. And the way that we interact, every eye roll, every frustration that we express, like in our private, driving in the car, saying all the things that we think about that person, but we would never say it. All of those things are still being in the action of those things that we otherwise consider to be bad and wrong.
And this is why we call it radical self-responsibility.
It is radical, very radical.
Yes.
And it is hard and it is not often fun. But the ripple effects in our life are worth the grit. They are so worth the grit. Because the more that we can take ownership for, the more freedom that we have, because no one has any power over us when we can take full self-responsibility.
Right?
Yep.
This is the meaning of sovereignty.
Exactly. And that comes down to the most microest of things, like in relationship, in friendship. If you can take full responsibility for the way that you feel about the other person's actions and you can communicate it in that way, then they no longer have power over you for their actions. And it is the most challenging and most rewarding work that I think anybody can do ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And I feel like I could talk to you about this forever. And I'm going to respect your time and I'm going to respect the listener's time.
Totally.
Maybe there might be a need for another conversation. We can touch on that. But but having this conversation with you, a really deep, really profound conversation, is just a reflection of who you are within SoulSync as well. So I know that this conversation wasn't a lead up to your body of work necessarily, but it really is a reflection of the kind of woman that we would be working with when we do take on your services, because it matters. And I know that there are so many soul missioned women out there who have really important work to do, and they need the kind of support from someone who has this depth.
Yeah.
And so even though it's not a conversation about your SoulSync, I would still love to offer an opportunity for you to share how women can work with you now that they know who you are.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I agree. The consciousness and the frequencies that I personally bring to SoulSync is what makes SoulSync different. It's like we buy from people who we resonate with. And to this day, I have never seen anybody have or offer a software or platform that is looking at life through this lens. And to me, it holds the impeccability and the integrity of the collective of individuals who co-create with SoulSync, because everyone's in a similar resonance. And so what that means is that we can fly, we can grow and scale and make greater impacts together through SoulSync. And so even though it's indirect, it is direct, because all of us impacts the way that we create and the way that we support people and the way that we serve people. And it interacts it brings in our conflict resolution and our willingness to be in co-creation with others. And so it's totally related. So thank you for linking those pieces together. And so, yes, so from a SoulSync perspective, if you are a mission soul, someone who has a business, someone who has offerings and services the world in various different ways, you can connect with me for subscription and membership, or to actually support you to build physically the things. And I always have space available for a limited number of one-on-one personal clients for their own personal ascension and evolution, or their missions evolution and ascension. And there's just limited space for those at the moment, whilst SoulSync is the bigger focus of my time at this time. And so you can connect with me on social media. I have a soulsyncSolutions.co Instagram account, or you can just find me carissabennett.co on Instagram or Facebook, and you can message me from there. That's the easiest way to get in contact.
I love it. I will also add those links to the show notes as well, so people can access you. But if you have any woman who's listening who has a profound soul-led mission, and you know that you're here to impact millions, and you know that you're here to reach far and wide, having Carissa on your team is going to allow you to do that.
Yeah.
So I know for myself, I'm so ready and I'm so excited to be able to come into the SoulSync fold, because I know that with your help and your team and your beautiful frequency and codes, I'm going to be able to impact so many more women. So that's just my shout out.
Thanks, babe. Appreciate it.
Okay, that's all right. But thank you from the bottom of my heart and the depths of my soul. Thank you so much for this conversation and being so transparent and honest, and really giving my audience and our audience something to think about.
Thanks, babe. Thanks for having me. I appreciated the conversation.
You're so welcome. Thanks, lovely. Thank you for being here, gorgeous woman, for rising with us, remembering with us, and refusing to shrink inside a world that benefits from your silence. If this episode moved you, cracked you open, or reminded you of who the hell you are becoming, share it with a woman who is ready to rise too. I want to invite you to follow, subscribe, and leave a rating so this message becomes too loud, too wild, and too undeniable to be ignored. The movement grows because of women like you. Women who choose truth over comfort, liberation over obedience, and voice over disappearance. You can connect with me, Samantha Sanford, at Rebel Matriarch, and all links to our guest are in the show notes below. Until next time, stay rooted, stay rebellious, and remember, the world changes when women refuse to disappear.